Hey everybody, it's Make and Tell Tuesday time, and today I'm going to be pulling out my colored pencils and coloring some of the BotaniCuts lilies. So I'll be showing you two different variations using basically the same technique, but with different colors to achieve a different look. So the first lily we're going to do is a white lily. So of course white lilies are not just solid white. There is color down in the throat and also in the shadows of the petals, and so we'll play around with that. Like I said, I'll be using colored pencils. I have chosen three colors and possibly a fourth. I might add a little bit of deeper shading, but we'll see how it goes. So I have chosen a yellow, or actually it's called cream. These are polychromos. These two, the yellow and the green, are polychromos, and then this one is my Prismacolor because I don't have a color in the polychromos for the shading of the petals that I really like. I like this one from the Prismacolor set better. This is Cloud Blue, and so that is a Prismacolor. These are polychromos, and it is May Green and Cream. Alright, so I have already die cut my lily and all of its various petals from white cardstock. And I'm just going to start by coloring. I'm going to start with my yellow, or it's actually the cream colored pencil, and I'm going to add some shading down into the throat of the flower and more the bottom of those petals, and kind of working outward and centering that color, or concentrating that color rather, more in the center of those petals. You can kind of use the score lines on the die cuts as a guide for where you want to add most of the concentration of color. And as I'm adding this color, I'm kind of working in circular motion and just blending that as I color. You can add quite a bit of pressure because this color is really light. So this is the base of the lily, and I'm just going to be coloring the petals that have the score lines because the other petals are the ones that get layered over the top, and so we won't bother coloring those on this base flower. Okay, so now I'm going to pull out my green, and this time I'm going to add some shading, and again we're going to concentrate it more into the throat of the flower, but we're going to use a little bit of a different technique this time. Instead of the circular motion, I'm going to be adding this shading using lighter strokes. So I'm starting at the base or the throat of the flower and then just pulling outward really lightly and kind of building up the color that way. It just gives a little more natural look to the shading. A lot of times if you look at a lily or even our flower petals in general, the color will be concentrated along the veins in the petals. And this just kind of mimics that. I'm following the curve of those score lines as well as when I do this. If you feel it needs a little bit of blending, you can use odorless mineral spirits and a blending stump, or I like this little pen that I came across a while back. This is a Finesse colored pencil blender pen. It says it's formulated to blend wax-based colored pencils. I picked this up at Hobby Lobby a while back and I really like it. So I'm going to just take this. It's basically the same concept as mineral spirits and or Gamsol they call it sometimes, and a blending stump. But this is just a little easier to work with. I'm just kind of going to blend a little bit of that color out around the edges to soften that and really create a nice fade into the white. So I'm going to be doing the same thing now with the petals that get layered over the top. So now we can go ahead and assemble our lily. I did put together a more detailed video of the assembly of the lily. If you need that, you can check that out as well. So I'll just kind of speed through this process of assembling this. And then we'll add a little more shading using our blue colored pencil. Okay, so now we're going to pull out this blue and we're going to add some shading kind of where the shadows would fall, and where a lot of times if you would look at an image of a lily, you'll see some kind of hints of blue in the petals where the shadows are falling. So that's what we're going to do. Now it's totally optional. If you want to skip this step, you can, but it just does kind of give your lily just a little more special look to it. I would go very lightly on this step, and I would also be careful about the color that you choose. You kind of want a gray blue, but not too gray, or it just ends up looking dirty. So I'm just going to be adding some of this in a few areas down around the edges of the petal and in the throat of the flower. And we'll also add some here to this front petal to give that a look like it's in the shadow. You can do this before you assemble the lily as well. It's up to you if you want to do it before or after. But sometimes I think if you do it after, it's a little easier to tell where you might want those shadows to fall. For example, we're going to put some behind this petal here. This petal is layered over the top, so on this one we're going to add a little shading down there where they overlap. And the same for this side. And if you feel like you need to do a little blending to kind of smooth out those edges, you can go back in with the blending stump or the blending pen and smooth out some of those areas. All right, and then we just need to add our stamen. And honestly, for those, even though the rest of my flower is colored with colored pencils, I find it's easier to just sponge some ink onto those. So I'm using mustard seed, distress oxide, and a little bit of spiced marmalade up here on the tips. And then we'll just tuck those inside of our lily and it's all finished. So now let's do a variation of this technique using some different colors to create more of a stargazer lily look. Stargazers are so pretty. They're one of my favorites. When I worked as a floral designer, they were one of those flowers that you put in a bouquet and the whole bouquet just takes on this beautiful, gorgeous look. So they are one of my favorites. So let's go ahead and play around with using the same coloring technique, switching up the colors a little bit and creating a stargazer. So I'm going to be using a few more colors this time than we used on the white lily. These are again polychromos. I have light flesh, dark flesh, and alizarin crimson. Those are the colors I'm going to use for the petals, and then I have a couple other colors that we're going to use for the spots. Stargazers have oftentimes little spots on the petals, and so I have a couple of darker colors chosen for those. I have burnt ochre and burnt carmine. So we're going to use the same basic technique we'll start with this large petal. This is just an easy one to demonstrate on. And so I'm starting off with that light flesh color, and I'm going to put down just a base of color and using kind of circular coloring motion and a decent amount of pressure since this is a really light color. And the same as before, we'll concentrate the color in the center of the petal and down into where the throat of the flower would be. And then kind of work out lighter as we get towards the edges. You can do that by more or less pressure on your pencil as you're coloring. Of course, lighter pressure gives you a lighter color, and you can blend that out as you get towards the outer edges by just using a really light amount of pressure. And then of course, where you want more concentrated color, just add more pressure. The circular motion just helps to blend everything out and create a nice fade or gradient. Okay, and then we're going to take the next darker color, this a dark flesh, and we'll do the same thing and build up some more color down the center of that petal. All right, at this stage, if you feel it needs a little blending, you can take your blending pen or your blending stump and just go over that area and blend that color so you get a nice gradient. Then I'm going to go ahead and take the darkest color that I showed for the petals. This is alizarin crimson. And I'm going to do the same thing that we did with the green when we were coloring the white lily. I'm just going to use some light strokes to build up the color that way. It's a different kind of shading technique that gives a little different effect. Takes a little patience. Don't use too much pressure, just nice and soft, and build up those colors, that color with just those light, gentle strokes. And I'm going to really deepen it up down here in the throat of the flower again. Nice and deep color down in there. Okay, now we can go ahead and add the spotted details that you always see on the Stargazer lily petals. I have the burnt carmine, and I'll just add some dots. Go for a random look. Nothing too symmetrical or perfectly spaced for a more natural look. And I'm also going to switch to this lighter color as I get towards the outer edge of the petal. This is burnt ochre. All right, and so there's a really good start to a stargazer. And I'll just continue on in this same manner until my entire lily is colored. Okay, so all of our petals are colored for our stargazer, and we can go ahead and assemble that as well. All right, and there you have it. There's our finished stargazer. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this Make and Tell Tuesday where we pulled out the BotaniCuts Lily's dies and added some color using colored pencils. I hope it inspires you to pull out your dies and get creating today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you around.